Kevin Colbert spoke with Pittsburgh media on Monday, giving some indications as to what the plans could be for the Pittsburgh Steelers moving forward, specifically at quarterback, maybe Stephon Tuitt, and other outlooks that they have on this upcoming season, which he did indicate this was his last year and that the Steelers won't name a GM until after the NFL draft has concluded. I'm Chris Carter on the Locked On Steelers podcast. We'll talk about all the things he said, what it looks like for the team's plans for 2022 and beyond. And joining me will be Wesley Euler of Steeler Nation Radio. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find us on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button to help on this video if you're enjoying it. Hit the subscribe button to our YouTube channel if you want more of our daily content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day. And if you give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, you'll get a special shout out at the end of the show if you have a comment attached to it. Joining me as always, Wesley Euler from Steeler Nation Radio. He's been on with us for several weeks now, jumping on and giving us great insight. Wes, how you doing?
Chris, I feel like as a recurring guest, I should have like some line that I drop every time you introduce me. So I'll work on it. What's up, partner?
No, what's up, man? How's it going? Of course, you can find Wes Euler on Steeler Nation Radio, the Ears and Beers podcast, all sorts of different places. He does a lot of great work. Check him out. He did a great job filling in for Stan Savran on ESPN Radio. So he's doing a fantastic job over at iHeart. But Wes, let's talk about Kevin Colbert because he went in, and this was, Kevin Colbert. He's been a GM for the Steelers since you and I were in like middle school.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, this is the end of an era that we know is coming. And he said it would. Kevin Colbert in his speaking said he made it clear to Art Rooney II and the Pittsburgh Steelers organization that this was going to be his last year. So that was part of the plan. Obviously the impact of Ben Roethlisberger's retirement falling in the same line, that all kind of fits together. But Kevin Colbert does get to play one last role in setting up the future of the Pittsburgh Steelers with this upcoming draft class. And I thought his comments about the quarterback position were very interesting. A few notes here. One, he talked about how one of the big sticking points he has about quarterbacks, it has to be accuracy. They need to be more accurate. That's one something he said. Two, he said, according to Mark Caboli of The Athletic, who we had on yesterday's show talking about Brian Flores, he talked about Kenny Pickett and saying, he doesn't have a problem with Kenny Pickett's small hands, which has been one of the biggest hands up. And then three, he also said the plan for the Steelers quarterbacks right now is to go into camp with 4 quarterbacks and letting them battle it out. And that if they were to play a game literally today, that Mason Rudolph would be their starter. Now, of all the overreactions we could have to all of that, Wes, some people are saying Mason Rudolph is guaranteed the starter. What are we doing here? That's not what he said. But this is what I've said for months now. The plan isn't to go trade for Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson or hope Deshaun Watson comes because Brian Flores is now one of your coaches. The plan is to get a veteran, draft a rookie if the rookie fits, where you're drafting, and then have Dwayne Haskins and Mason Rudolph and see who battles it out in camp. Mm-hmm. Whoever comes out on top as the best manager and understanding of your game plan and with the fewest amount of mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, you just hit the nail on the head. Now, there's obviously a lot of questions in there, right?
Right.
When you say veteran quarterback, that's a pretty wide net. Some would say that Jimmy G and Kirk Cousins are veteran quarterbacks. Some would say Jameis Winston and Tyrod Taylor are veteran quarterbacks. A rookie, right? Is it the 20th overall pick, or is it somebody you take a flyer on in the 4th or 5th round? So there's obviously a lot of questions there still. But yeah, I think what people like yourself who are clearly in the know, who are in lockstep with the team, who cover the team on a day-to-day basis, not really anything we were surprised by or caught us out of the blue. I think we've always kind of thought that this was the plan. The real question is, do they love any of these quarterbacks enough to take them with their first pick or maybe even in the 2nd round?
Yeah, that's the big question here. And of course, comments about Kenny Pickett's hands, stream to that. But, Kevin Colbert, yeah, that's
it's never not funny. Like,
no, it's not.
Yeah. There's just all the Ricky Bobby, I don't know what to do with my hands, the Austin Powers small hands, the grab my strong hand child from Scary Movie. I mean, there's a lot of different pop culture references there.
There are a ton of different things there, but to me that indicates they aren't ruling out Kenny Pickett.
Right.
But also, his comments about accuracy, that kind of steps to Malik Willis, who that if there was one guy in those top like 5 quarterback rankings who would rank lower in accuracy than others, it is Malik Willis. So that kind of dips into some thoughts there. And Wes, it continues to make me think this team is not going to jump at one of these quarterbacks at the
Correct.
20th spot. If someone falls to them in the second round, I can see that happening and them saying, okay, we go to battle with that. But I think, and Kevin Colbert even said, of the positions that are deep versus weak, he didn't list quarterback as one of the weak spots in this draft. He listed defensive tackle, center, and guard as those weaker spots. So that makes me wonder, would they even be okay with waiting even past that top group of guys, say to like the 4th round, and then you end up with like, Caleb Ellaby or someone along those lines, where you're getting Carson Strong type of quarterback who, obviously isn't NFL ready, but has traits that you can be like, I could work with that.
Yeah, that's what I would love to know is, it feels like, we now have 2 ideas what they're looking for in terms of that next young rookie guy. Mobility. That's been something that, I mean, Mike Tomlin's been talking about quarterback mobility since the Steelers bye week months ago, and he's repeated that a few times now. You've heard that from other people as well, too. And then staying away from inaccurate quarterbacks, another nugget that you get from Kevin Colbert. But even that, Chris, like that doesn't really start to narrow it down, right? I mean, you said it. When I heard that inaccuracy thing, my kind of rabbit ears went up, because that's been the knock on Malik Willis is that he does so many things well. He's got insane upside. He's got insane mobility and athleticism, and a lot of things that translate very well to the quarterback position now, and even what it could be in another 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
But inaccuracy, that's always been the, when you look at his weaknesses, I don't care if you're NFL Network, Pro Football Focus, wherever,
right.
Weaknesses for Malik Willis, number 1 is pretty much inaccuracy. So there's so much intrigue there, and that's been a lot of the fun of this offseason. But I think you'd really have to see somebody fall. I know I saw some mock drafts that had the Steelers nabbing Kenny. Did you see that yesterday? Pro Football Focus had them getting Kenny Pickett in the 2nd round. Like, hey, if you go to pick in the 2nd round and Kenny Pickett is still on the board, you sprint to the podium and take him. Right. And I'm saying this with a WVU flag hanging behind me here. If you're watching, on YouTube, you sprint to the podium and take them.
Big slide on your way there.
You icky shuffle. You do the Macarena. you dance walk that whole way up to the podium and you take them. But is there that's going to be the question, is value? Because some people would argue, hey, if Sam Howell's there in the 2nd round, you should take him. And we know that's a guy that the Steelers, that Mike Tomlin and Kevin Colbert have visited down in Chapel Hill a couple times and have a relationship with. Dude, it is, for me, this is maybe the chief reason why this is the most exciting, most interesting Steelers offseason in a while. Yeah, you've had some switches to the coaching staff, and you bring in Brian Flores now, which is awesome for people like us in the content business. And you're replacing your GM for the first time in forever. But man, it's always the quarterback position, right? It always comes back to that. And I think we know what the Steelers are going to do without knowing what the Steelers are going to do, if that makes sense. And I don't know, that to me is exciting. That's an exciting place to be as an analyst, as a fan. We have a lot of the different, okay, we think they could do this, and if this guy's here and this, and maybe they go there, but you really don't know. I don't think any of us would be shocked if they took a quarterback 20th overall. I don't think any of us would be shocked if they came away from the draft without a quarterback, period. There's a lot of wiggle room there. And buddy, I'm interested to see how it all plays out. And I think we will know more after the combine in another couple weeks. We'll have some interviews there. There's always some nuggets that come out from the insiders there. But it's going to be very interesting to follow this over the next 2 months until the draft.
Oh, absolutely. This is not going to stop. This is absolutely going to be
quarterback.
Yeah, quarterback every week. I mean, and to be fair, I mean, it shouldn't, because this is what we've talked about, what Steelers fans have dreaded for the past 8 years. When is Ben Roethlisberger going to retire? What are they going to do once he does retire? they're legitimate questions. And now it's here in front of you. And the Steelers aren't sitting first overall with, an obvious, a Trevor Lawrence, a Joe Burrow type of prospect who, could be drafted to the team, and everyone say, well, that's the best quarterback, and that's the next superstar franchise guy that's going to lead the NFL in a lot of ways. So, I get it. This is intrigue, but this is part of what comes with this territory. And I think you tweeted this out earlier on Monday saying, this is, Steelers fans, you don't know what this life is like for so many teams. You don't know when your next quarterback's coming, if you're going to be good this year. There's a lot of uncertainty. And it's starting to ring home, like, dang, like it's been this long since we had to think this way.
And buddy, you touched on this at the opening of this segment here with the Mason Rudolph news today. With the Kevin Colbert, if we played a game this weekend, he'd be our guy, and just the absolute meltdown to that in a lot of corners of Steelers Nation. Chris, there are a lot of Steelers fans, most of them around our relative age, right? In their early 30s, late 20s, early 20s. There's a lot of Steelers fans, early 30s and younger, who they have no idea what this uncertainty is like. They've never been through this before, and they are melting down already. Like, folks, you're going to have some fortitude over the next year or so, all right? That's the way that it works. We've been very spoiled. I say this all the time, Chris, and every time I do, I get someone who tweets me, and they're like, no, it's not. It's been very easy to be a Steeler fan over the last 2 decades. You haven't had to worry about quarterback. You had to worry about head coach for like a month. You haven't had to worry about your GM or your ownership. Buddy, like, welcome to the reality of most NFL teams here. And that doesn't mean that it has to be long suffering. That doesn't mean that it has to be in perpetuity. But if you've got to kind of grin and bear it here in the meantime, don't lose the plot. Don't go crazy. All right. Because you can turn this thing around really quickly. But you also can't just make your quarterback of the future appear out of thin air. And if you try and rush that process, all you're going to do is continue to set yourself back further and further.
Exactly. You don't want to. You want to make sure that when you take your shot, it's a legitimate shot, and you still may miss. That doesn't guarantee that you're going to get the quarterback of your dreams, but it at least gives you a better shot to do it. And I think it also helps you because if your team is still really built really well around that quarterback that isn't playing that good, it still gives you a chance to be competitive even when you don't have that guy. And I think it makes it easier to correct that mistake. If you know what, that we took the shot at quarterback, but we still got this core that we really like. Let's take another shot really soon. But if you trade all your picks and make these aggressive moves for a guy that you're really not sure about in a class that isn't that heralded for quarterbacks, that puts you in a rough position. We got to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to keep talking to Wes, not just about quarterbacks, but other things that Kevin Colbert said, one involving a key player to the Steelers' plans in 2022. But first, we're going to have to talk to you guys about betonline.net. Football season might be over, but basketball is full steam ahead with both pro and college hoops well underway. From the latest odds, totals, player performance props to where the next fired coach is going to land, betonline.net is the #1 spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, UFC odds, right down to Olympic coverage and information. Head to the website today and make sure if you use it on your mobile device that you can, and you learn more about all the trends and all the action at betonline.net, where the game starts. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Wesley Euler of Steeler Nation Radio and the Ears and Beers podcast. We thank you again for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day, but make sure that you're also following the Locked On NFL YouTube channel. We have Locked On experts appearing there every day, covering the biggest stories around the NFL every Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. It's free and available wherever you get your podcast, but especially on our YouTube channel. You can also find me there because I host the Friday episode with your boy Q of Locked On Raiders, and I was on the Monday episode talking about Brian Flores with Bo Brack. So do check out the Locked On NFL YouTube page. Want to make sure we note that. But now, Wes, one of the biggest storylines, I think, for this offseason that everyone's wondering about is the status of Stephon Tuitt, who never returned from his surgery / the tragedy of his brother passing away last offseason, and he never came back. Now, Kevin Colbert, he wasn't going to just say, oh, yeah, he's definitely just going to play. But he did say that the Steelers are planning to going to make him part of the plans for the 2022 season, which tells me they've had those discussions that they said they were going to have with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and and it seems like he does have plans to play again. Wes, Tuitt, I think, is an instrumental player to the Steelers' plans if he can be healthy. And that's been a big question for a lot of his career.
Yeah.
But if he could come back, I think that does so much for what this defensive line was supposed to be the best in football this past year. And it lost 2 of its top 3 players, and it became not so good. Starting guys like, Mondo and Loudermilk and guys who, like, they gave their best efforts, but
sure.
they're not top tier caliber like when Hayward and Tuitt are lining up next to each other for most of a season. What's your outlook on Stephon Tuitt and the possibility, the reality of him being back and what he might do for the Steelers, and the reality that can he get back to where he was after missing a whole year?
See, that's the big question for me. After what Kevin Colbert said and some of the other messaging of the offseason, feels like Tuitt's going to be back. This as well as me. Guys like Mike Tomlin, like Kevin Colbert, they've been doing this for so long. They know every word they say is dissected and picked apart and taken without any grains of salt, taken 100% literally, like everything that they say. And with that, they're not going to say something like, expecting to have him with the team in 2022 if they thought that there was a legitimate chance that he wasn't going to play football again or he didn't want to be in Pittsburgh, anything like that. So now the question for me goes from speculating if he will return to now wondering what Stephon Tuitt are you getting? Because the injury stuff, as you just mentioned, it's not like that was a first-time thing this year. He's had some injury-plagued seasons, certainly throughout his time with the Pittsburgh Steelers. You wonder where his mental health is as well, too, after what he's gone through the past year and being away from the game for a year. And Chris, every position is different, so it's not fair to blanket statement these things. But there's not a ton of examples of guys who miss an entire season for whatever reason, for injury, for contract holdout situation like Lev Bell. There's not a ton of it. There's certainly examples, but the majority of the time, guys, when they miss an entire season, particularly at Stephon Tuitt's age, I'm not talking when they're 23, 24 years old, something like that, they're not quite the same guy when they come back. That doesn't mean they can't be good.
Right.
But Stephon Tuitt wasn't just good. Stephon Tuitt was a borderline all-pro type player. Stephon Tuitt was a great player at times for the Steelers, and he's still in his 20s, but he's getting close to that 30 number. So that's what it all boils down to to me. And maybe you could say the same thing about Tyson Alualu as well, too. I'm very confident that you're going to have those 2 guys back, along with Cam Hayward, the front 3 that you thought you were going to have last season, and you only had you didn't have for any snaps, and you only had Alualu for a few series there against Buffalo week 1. What Alualu are you getting? I think, though, even more importantly, what Tuitt are you getting? Because he still commands a large cap hit. He still was part of your plans for this defense last year and this year. That becomes the question. Both those guys essentially missed the season. You expect them to be back. I think that, they say what happens when you assume, but I think that's safe to assume at this point. But what Tuitt are you getting? What Alualu are you getting after injuries, after some other stuff for Tuitt, and after a year away from the game for both of those guys? That, to me, becomes the real question. Can you depend on them in 2022 like you thought you were going to in 2021? I don't know if you can, at least with both of them.
That's a tough thing to depend on, and it also adds to the intrigue of me to the Steelers' plans, because Kevin Colbert made it clear, it's like, this isn't a deep defensive tackles class.
No.
So if the Steelers are wondering that themselves, what recourse do they have? Because to me, I think it's a better description would be it's top heavy, because I think everyone's excited about the guys from Georgia. Everyone's excited about Travis Jones from UConn, Jordan Davis, all those guys. But it's after that, there's a steep drop off.
Yes.
And if you have plans to make moves in this draft to your interior defensive line, you want to make those moves happen before that drop off occurs.
Yeah.
So maybe that means they're going to consider that. Maybe it doesn't. If they think that Stephon Tuitt's coming back, that's another line of questioning that's interesting there. But in addition to Stephon Tuitt, Colbert also kind of made it clear that he's not sold on Devin Bush, for a 5th-year option. But he did say that Devin Bush will be a better player in 2022. Also noting that the ACL recovery did impact him in 2021.
Sure.
those are two key positions in the middle of the Steelers defense that they need to figure out. And to me, that's a big thing. I think that's also a big reason, a big story plot line for, Brian Flores joining the Steelers and given that designation of linebacker coach.
Yeah, and he, Brian Flores, player development. I mean, you look at his time in Miami, if you want to go recent history, his defenses every single year gave up less and less yards per game. Every single year gave up less and less points per game. His first year when he got there in 2019, Chris, they had the youngest roster in the NFL.
Man.
They had clearly a team that was trying to, ownership that was trying to lose.
Yep.
He's pointed that out, and when you go back and you watch some of the things that transpired throughout that season, it's hard to deny in hindsight.
Mm-hmm.
They went from giving up the 30th most yards in the NFL, 30 out of 32 teams, and giving up the most points in 2019 with the youngest roster in football to the next year, top 5 in points allowed, top 20 in yards allowed. And then those numbers, the points allowed stayed the same. The yards allowed got slashed even more this past season. He has developed players. He has developed defenses. Again, that was the youngest roster in the NFL that he took over. It wasn't like he was inheriting a bunch of Cam Haywards and TJ Watts. He was inheriting a bunch of guys with pedigree, but that had never played in the NFL before. That player development's going to be huge because, Chris, you and I have talked about this a little bit. You love the layers, the bones of this defense. You love Cam Hayward and how good he still is in that leadership element. You love TJ Watt, one of the best football players in the world right now. Not best defenders, not best pass rushers, one of the best football players in the world right now. And Minkah Fitzpatrick's already a multiple-time All-Pro who's still on his rookie contract.
Mm-hmm.
But other than those three guys, you got a lot of questions. You've got a lot of, even with someone like Alex Highsmith that we all think belongs and can play, he still needs to get better. You talked about the linebackers. You talked about the defensive line. The secondary, what goes on with Joe Hayden? What goes on with Edmonds? A lot of questions. And that usually leads to more moving parts, more new bodies, and having a guy like Brian Flores on board when you are potentially going to be ushering in a lot of new, younger, inexperienced guys.
Mm-hmm.
I think the timing of that is perfect for the Steelers defense.
I think so too. You want to kind of set a new tone, like, not a new tone, because you do see, TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, Minkah Fitzpatrick, all these guys that are back there, but they're going to be the leading force in this team. And not that they haven't been for the past few years, but there's always been that sort of that elephant in the room that, hey, Ben's still the elder statesman. This is still Ben Roethlisberger is the top dog of the roster right now. He's out. So that means that that there needs to be a new resetting of who sets the tone. There's always been the thing. Ben Roethlisberger didn't like music in the locker room after games. Things like that. Now
Chase Claypool's taking over now.
Don't get me started on Chase Claypool. But now, but we've seen in that year where Ben Roethlisberger wasn't playing, the Steelers had music in the locker room. I remember being in there after they beat the Cleveland Browns in Heinz Field and going in and hearing the Temptations playing over the loudspeakers. I was like, okay, this is different. And to me, I think it was just like whoever was kind of leading the team that year, that's who, was kind of setting the tone. I'm intrigued to see who those leaders are. And, the influx of new guys, as far as guys who are returning, that's a huge part of this. And for Kevin Colbert to acknowledge Stephon Tuitt, as part of the plans, and they hope for Devin Bush, and they think that Devin Bush is going to turn it up next year. Those are two signs to me that maybe those aren't as desperate of needs of those positions in the upcoming draft for the Pittsburgh Steelers as one may have thought. But I want to talk to you more about some other items that he brought up here, because he also talked about, just his decisions and why he's deciding what he's deciding. And I think it plays into some interesting factors here as far as where the Steelers are planning, front office wise, coach wise, and everything else moving forward. We'll talk about that in just a minute here. But first, we're going to talk to you guys about rockauto.com. Save time and money when you're using Rock Auto. Why choose to spend 30%, 50%, or even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or car dealership? For example, a Honda Odyssey fuel pump is $353 from the chain store, but it's only $216 when you get it at rockauto.com. Rock Auto is a family-owned business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Rock Auto prices are reliably low for every customer. They have everything you could need, from brake parts to tail lamps to motor oil and even new carpet. And if you go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution for your auto part needs, you could find the best answer for your car or truck. To do that, go to rockauto.com right now, and you'll see all the parts available for your car or truck. Be sure when you go there to write "Locked On" and "How did you hear about us" box, so that they know that we sent you when you visit rockauto.com. Amazing selection, reliable low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com today. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Wes Euler of Steeler Nation Radio and the Ears and Beers podcast. Wes, also want to talk to you about Kevin Colbert's comments on his situation as far as, why he's choosing this year. And he kind of let on. He was like, when we're 9-7-1, we're not good enough. When we're not winning a Super Bowl, we're not good enough. I don't know that we're stale, but we're not good enough. And he kind of talked about, how, one, this has been a long run, but he made it clear to the Steelers this was going to be his last season anyways. This was always going to be his plan. This was part of the plan moving forward. But, it's kind of interesting. They say they're not going to announce anything until after the draft. They want to make sure that process is completed so that there's no news or anything about that could stir up things, which I think is, it's smart, but it's, I think it's going to be interesting. But I still have the lead guy being Brandon Hunt because I think that they're pleased with him as the guy from inside the organization who has played a pivotal role in a lot of their decisions.
I would agree
in building the roster. What's your outlook on what this means for the organization's, trajectory? Because, I mean, some people are even saying with Brian Flores being added that, Tomlin's going to be out the door soon and this, that, and the third. I'm not buying into all that this much. That much is the part that's changing of the organization.
Yeah, I'm with you too. And, you mentioned earlier, I was filling in for Stan Savran today, and one of our, I can't remember if it was a caller or a tweeter, suggested, could there be a power struggle between Brian Flores and Terrell Austin? The Steelers, that's just not something that happens in the confines of the UPMC Rooney Sports Complex. When you've got the stability, when you've got the security that everyone has, from Mr. Rooney to Kevin Colbert or whoever will replace him, Mike Tomlin, like these guys aren't worried about their job security. These guys know how the Steelers operate. These guys are confident and comfortable in the jobs and the roles that they have. That doesn't worry me for a second that there's going to be a power struggle between Austin and Flores. I do not think that that's going to happen. But to get back to Kevin Colbert, I think the timeline is right, Chris. Part of me was jonesing for an announcement earlier.
Yeah.
But the more I think about it, well, for you and I, it works out well because, we got the combine and then we got the draft. And then it is a few dead weeks there in the NFL terms. Well, you know what? We're going to have a new GM to talk about, which is great for the content.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think say it's Brent, because I'm with you. If I'm putting a $20 bet down now on my favorite sports book app of who the next Steelers GM is, Brandon Hunt would be where I would place that bet.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say it's Brandon Hunt, just for hypothetical, not that Chris and I are privy to any inside information or anything, just hypothetically here. If you name him, if you announce that before the draft, and this draft class ends up not being a great one, a lot of the irrational, emotional, hyperbolic portion of the fan base is going to say, Brandon Hunt stinks. I mean, look at that draft. He was in charge. They knew Colbert was leaving. He was really in charge, and he stinks.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't want to set up Brandon Hunt or Omar Khan or Louis Riddick or whoever it is to have to potentially, I think, deal with that right off the bat. And the second thing to me, with that too, is if it ends up not being the greatest draft class, when we look back at the 2 decades of Kevin Colbert, I don't think people are going to hold that against him. I
agree. You're going to,
And then if the opposite, if it is a really good draft class, then it's, hey, Kevin Colbert, what a legend. And Brandon Hunt had something to do with that too. Oh, we're in good hands. So I just think for a multitude of different reasons, both selfishly for people like you and I that are in this business, and just from the perspective of expectations and realistic timelines, I think that this is the way to do it.
I think so too, and it's part of why the Steelers, they don't announce anything. They want to hold on to things. Like, for example, people wanted the Steelers to announce who their punter would be in Week 18 against the Ravens and everything like that. And then they were like, "Oh man, why did they go with Presley Harvin versus Corliss Waitman?" Blah 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 blah. And I'm like, you know what they were doing that whole time? They were sitting there saying, you know what? we're going to see who does better in practice this week, because it's been a very week-to-week season with two guys that aren't that experienced at punting in the NFL just yet. We're going to see how they do, and then we'll make a decision. But we're not telling you, because then
that's
if we
do it,
right, because say they commit to Presley Harvin or Corliss Waitman at the beginning of the week, and then throughout the week
then they have a bad week,
right? And then they're like, well, do we stick with that because we said it was this guy, and then we called liars or it looked like buffoons? Why open that can of worms? Just say, well, they're going to compete all week long. It's how they've operated from their front office to their players to all the different things. It's one. I think it's another one of the little things that they do that's you can put on the long list of things that they do that makes them a strong organization. And
there's also how many organizations could have kept that Brian Flores announcement under wraps until they made? No one had. Man, Shefty didn't have any nuggets on this. Not Pelissero, not Rappaport, not Jerry Dulac or anybody like that. Like that's listen, trust me, that's the way you want your organization to operate. Mm-hmm. You don't want to do the Dallas Cowboys trying to win the headlines. You don't want to do the Rex Ryan New York Jets trying to win the headlines and make noise in the media every single week. You want to, was it Teddy Roosevelt, right? Who said you want to walk quietly but carry a big stick here on President's Day? Well, I guess technically this is going to air on Tuesday, but on President's Day week, that's how you want your organization to operate. Chris, the poet Lil Wayne once said,
oh gosh,
real G's move in silence like lasagna. And the Steelers have been moving in some silence, baby, and I love it.
Oh boy.
Real G's moving silence like lasagna.
Yeah. Oh man, you.
Come on, that was
showed our age.
That was pretty good, huh?
That was great. That was great. Real G's do move in silence like lasagna, and I'm just that. I'm sorry, you just threw me.
I just totally throw you off there.
Lil Wayne, I can't believe that you did that on the show. But to your point, that is exactly what happens here, and you don't need to come through and make the loudest noise. You just need to come through and do your job and that'll make the biggest impact when you're successful. And again, we're not talking about like any of these moves being the things that actually be the things like, oh, that's what got the Steelers the win.
Right.
But whenever you're building a team, it's not just one move, it's several moves, it's several additions. The Bengals didn't become this team overnight by simply saying, oh, Joe Burrow, we pick him first overall. They needed Jamar Chase. They needed to go get a Mike Hilton. They needed
Zach Wilson.
They needed to go get Zach Wilson. They needed to put so many different pieces in place for them to even have a shot. And again, they only finished 10-7. They didn't run the conference all year long. They played well and then got hot late and was able to capitalize in big moments up until the Super Bowl. I think it's, there's often winning is so, the line between winning and losing is so razor thin that I don't
especially in the NFL,
especially in the NFL when all 32 teams are well, maybe not Miami sometimes, but they're competing to win. They're competing to be the best.
Look at the last week of the season. I mean, none of us thought the Jags were going to beat the Colts.
Nope.
Even if you were one of those people on Twitter acting like you thought, you didn't really think the Jags were going to beat the Colts.
You were a Steelers fan hoping that the Jaguars beat the Colts.
And that was a Colts team that a few weeks prior to that, everyone was saying, hey, watch out. These guys are going to be a dark horse in the AFC. Watch out. That offensive line, Jonathan Taylor, that defense, Darius Leonard, watch out. And they blew it to Jacksonville on the last week of the season. Yeah, that line, you're absolutely right, is so thin. And it's the Al Pacino, right? It's the inches that you need are all around you. You just got to get a little bit better here, a little bit better there, improve in the margins. And then, you look up maybe in 2023 and you're right back in the race. You're right back in the conversation.
Absolutely. And that's what the Steelers are building for. But again, going back to where we started this show about, when it comes to Kevin Colbert, when it comes to the Steelers' plans, him saying they got they're planning on having 4 quarterbacks. To me, that signals they're looking for whoever doesn't cost them too much to add to the roster while they rebuild the rest of the team. And it's going to be all about, hey, which one of y'all cannot lose his games and take what's put in front of you. But I fully anticipate there to be a serious commitment by this team to its defense and its offensive line. And interestingly enough, Colbert, in his list of positions that he listed out that were deep versus slim in talent this year, he put offensive tackle in the deep category, which makes me wonder, is that the first round move? Which is why we picked Clint Fritz's mock draft Monday on Monday for as his winner, because he had Ole Miss's Charles Cross, the offensive tackle, as being the Steelers' first round selection. So lots of thoughts there, lots of directions this team can go, but it's certainly an exciting week. You get Brian Flores over the weekend, and you get Kevin Colbert on Monday. What else is going to happen this week, Wes? I don't even know.
I heard Troy Polamalu's coming out of retirement.
Oh my gosh. Don't tell these people that, because some of them will believe it, and then I'll have to tweet about it, and then it's gonna be a whole thing. But hey, it'll give me another day of content. Anyways, thanks so much.
I heard Ben Roethlisberger's coming back. Oh, you didn't hear it from me.
No, don't you do that. Don't you do that. Or the worst would be Tom Brady joining the Steelers. Tom Brady's coming out of retirement coming to Pittsburgh. That would just be just the living nightmare.
Yeah, the only good thing about that though is the only fans that would hate that more than us would be Patriots fans. So at least we'd get to stick it up their backside for once.
That was a little bit of violence there, man.
Sorry. Yeah, if you're watching on YouTube, I got a little aggressive there.
It was a little hardcore. I was like, dang, man, it ain't that serious. But anyways, thanks, Wes, for joining us here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Yes, sir. At Wesley Euler on Twitter. I host the Steelers Blitz with Arthur Moats, as most of you loyal listeners here to Locked On know. You can find us Steelers Blitz wherever you get your podcasts. We're also live at noon on iHeart app, iHeart website, Steelers app, Steelers.com. And then if you're part of the Steelers WVU fan crossover, myself and Adam Crowley host Ears and Beers 2 episodes a week on WVU Sports. So you can catch me there as well.
Absolutely. Do catch Wes there. He does a great job, as does Adam Crowley, with all their work. I'm Chris Carter of the Locked On Steelers podcast. You can find me on Twitter at Carter Critiques. You can also find me on Instagram with the same handle. You can find this show, the Locked On Steelers podcast, on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to our channel for all of our daily content, Monday through Friday. We're going to be back tomorrow with another strong episode here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But be sure to leave us a 5-star review with a positive comment, and you'll get a special shout out at the end of the show, like this person who's called themselves Tequila Steeler with a 5-star review that says, great show, great stuff, and super informative. Thank you, Tequila Steeler, for your 5-star review. We got 2 more coming of recent 5-star reviews that we're going to read throughout the week. So if you want your shout out, give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcast. That stuff helps us out. We got Tony Serino. He's back, and he's going to be on the show tomorrow for a Tony Wednesday. Wes, I need to get you guys to coordinate. You're the W, man. You need
Tony Tuesday, Wes Wednesday. I mean, the alliterations right there. Listen, I'll tweet him. I'll tell him he's got to figure it out.
He's got to figure this out, because it's getting to be too much.
Sort yourself out, bud.
Anyways, thanks so much for checking out the Locked On Steelers podcast. Be back in your ears and on your screens tomorrow.